It doesn't feel like failure. That's what makes it confusing. You're doing everything right, moving forward, achieving, progressing, and yet something is missing, not externally, internally, a quiet absence that success doesn't fill. Because the life you were building was never designed to fulfill you, it was designed to keep you moving. And the more you achieve, the harder it becomes to admit that it still feels empty, because now you have everything you were supposed to want, and it still isn't enough. Matrix lose control over you. At some point, quietly and without warning, a realization begins to form, not loud enough to disrupt your life, but persistent enough that you can no longer ignore it. You did everything right, you followed the path, you made sensible choices, you pursued what was expected, and yet something feels missing, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that others would notice, but in the silent spaces of your day, in the moments between tasks, in the pauses before sleep, there is a subtle, unsettling emptiness, a question that does not demand attention, but refuses to disappear. Why does a life that looks complete feel incomplete? This is not failure, it is something more disorienting, because failure can be corrected. But this feeling, this quiet sense of misalignment, suggests something deeper, that perhaps the life you were told to want was never truly yours. Modern society does not prepare you for this realization. It prepares you to chase, but not to question what you are chasing. From an early age, the blueprint is handed to you. Achieve, stabilize, accumulate, progress. And if you follow it well enough, you are promised a certain kind of fulfillment, a life that makes sense, a life that looks right. But what is rarely discussed is whether it feels right. We live in a culture that confuses visibility with meaning. The more visible your life becomes, your success, your milestones, your image, the more it is assumed that you are fulfilled. But visibility is not the same as depth, and success, when unexamined, can become a quiet form of conformity. There is a subtle pressure to want what others want, to desire what is collectively approved. And so, without realizing it, you begin to build a life that is socially coherent, but psychologically distant. You become someone who makes sense to the world, but feels unfamiliar to yourself. The psychologist Carl Jung once suggested that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but this is not something society teaches directly, because becoming who you truly are often requires you to question everything you were told to become. Jung believed that much of human suffering comes from a split within the psyche, between the conscious identity we present and the unconscious self we neglect. And the life you were told to want often strengthens that split. It rewards the version of you that performs, that adapts, that fits, while quietly silencing the parts of you that do not align with expectation. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung wrote, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And so, what you experience as emptiness may not be absence. It may be the presence of something unacknowledged. This inner conflict does not appear all at once. It unfolds gradually, through a series of psychological shifts, not as a breakdown, but as a quiet awakening. The first shift is the recognition of borrowed desire. At some point, you begin to notice that many of your goals were not chosen consciously. They were inherited from family expectations, from cultural narratives, from comparisons you never questioned. There is a scene. A young professional sits in a dimly lit apartment. His laptop is still open from hours of work. On paper, everything is moving forward: career, income, stability. But tonight, something feels different. He is not overwhelmed. He is not stressed. He is disconnected. For the first time, he asks himself a question he has never seriously considered. If no one were watching, would I still want this life? And the silence that follows is more revealing than any answer. The second shift is the emergence of inner resistance. Once you recognize that your desires may not be entirely your own, a quiet resistance begins to form. Not loud enough to change your life immediately, but strong enough to disrupt your certainty. You begin to feel less motivated by things that once drove you. Achievements feel less satisfying, milestones feel less meaningful, and this can be frightening because you may interpret it as loss of ambition or a lack of discipline, but in reality, it is something else. It is the psyche withdrawing energy from what no longer aligns. Viktor Frankl once wrote, "When a person cannot find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." But what happens when even distraction loses its effect? You are left with yourself. And for many, this is the most uncomfortable place to be, because it is here, in the absence of noise, that truth begins to surface. The third shift is the confrontation with emptiness. This is the stage most people avoid, because emptiness feels like failure. It feels like something has gone wrong. But psychologically, emptiness is not a void, it is a space created when false structures begin to collapse. There is another scene. An older man walks through a large, quiet house. The rooms are filled with the results of a lifetime of effort: furniture, photographs, carefully built stability. But the house feels distant. His children have grown, his career has stabilized, the goals that once defined him have been completed. And now, in their absence, he is left with a question that feels both simple and impossible. What was all of this for? This is not regret, it is something more subtle, a realization that a life can be full and still feel empty if it was not consciously lived. The fourth shift is the slow return to authenticity. If you remain in this space long enough without rushing to fill it, something begins to change, not externally, but internally. You start to notice what genuinely resonates with you, not what impresses others, not what fulfills expectations, but what feels real. This process is quiet. There are no dramatic breakthroughs, no clear instructions, just a gradual realignment. Jung called this individuation, the process of integrating all parts of yourself into a coherent whole. And this process cannot be rushed. It requires patience, honesty, and a willingness to let go of identities that no longer fit. Friedrich Nietzsche once observed, "He who has a reason to live can bear almost any how." But the tragedy of modern life is that many people are given a how without ever discovering their own why. And so they live efficiently, but not meaningfully. They succeed externally while feeling internally unanchored. The emptiness you feel is not a flaw in your life, it is a signal, a quiet indication that something within you is asking to be seen. And eventually, this process leads to a deeper confrontation, one that cannot be avoided forever: mortality. There is a final scene, a hospital room, late in the evening, the light is soft, the air is still. A woman lies in bed, her breath slow, her body fragile. Around her are the remnants of a life, relationships, accomplishments, memories. But in this moment, none of the external markers seem to matter. What matters is something far more intimate: whether she feels at peace with the life she lived, not the life she was told to want, but the life she actually experienced. And this is where clarity becomes undeniable. At the edge of life, there is no value in borrowed desires, no comfort in expectations fulfilled for others. Only one question remains: was I true to myself, or did I spend my life becoming someone else? The emptiness you feel now is connected to this moment. It is not random. It is your psyche anticipating a truth you have not yet fully faced: that time is limited, that life is not infinite, and that the cost of living unconsciously is not always visible immediately, but becomes undeniable in the end. So what changes when you begin to understand this? Not everything, but something essential. You stop measuring your life solely by progress. You begin to value alignment. You stop asking what is expected of you. You begin asking what is honest for you. And slowly, the emptiness begins to shift. Not because your life becomes perfect, but because it becomes real. You realize that the goal was never to build a life that looks complete from the outside, but to live a life that feels coherent from within. And this kind of life cannot be given to you. It must be discovered quietly, patiently, and often uncomfortably. So if you feel that subtle emptiness, that quiet sense that something is missing, even when everything seems to be in place, do not rush to silence it. Do not assume something is wrong. You may not be losing meaning, you may be outgrowing illusions. And perhaps that is where your real life begins, not in the pursuit of what you were told to want, but in the slow, deliberate process of discovering what you truly need. If this reflection resonated with you, consider staying connected, not for easy answers, but for deeper understanding.